Good evening, everyone, and welcome again to our NorCal MLK Foundation King and Fear virtual series. We are in our fifth week of this series that looks at Dr. King and what he has to say about fear. Fear in the context of our lived experience, fear in the context of our social experience, fear. What does Dr. King have to say about fear? And we are so happy to have with us one of the preeminent scholars in the world around the area of liberation theology, around the area of Black religion, around the area of religion writ large in the American and in the global context. He is the Reverend Dr. Dwight N. Hopkins, the Alexander Campbell Professor at the University of Chicago. We're so happy to have him with us today. Now, before we begin, little housekeeping, just to let you know how these virtual series run. We start with some brief announcements, and then we turn it over to our guest speaker for our series, after which we enter into a dialogue, and then we take questions from those of our participants in our Zoom sessions. You also have the availability, of course, as you are watching on YouTube, to watch, but if you come on to our Zoom session, you will be able to participate by asking questions of our guests. And then after that session, we then close with the salutation and with some more announcements toward the end. We would like to thank, though, to begin, our partners here for this particular event. We were invited to think about this idea of putting together a virtual series on King and Fear from the Tabernacle Community Development Corporation in San Francisco, California. TCDC is a partnership of leading African-American congregations who have come together to start a community development corporation that is now making a huge impact in the city and county of San Francisco, the San Francisco Bay Area, and the state of California with all of its work. And this is the 28th Lenten Tabernacle that this organization has led and provided. And we're so happy to be invited to participate in this way, this King and Fear virtual seminar series. So this is our fifth week. This is our final week of this series, and there is no better scholar to have than our great friend, Dwight Hopkins, who is also a founder and a co-founder of our King and Faith King and Faith series that was founded in 2016 under the leadership of Dr. Hopkins and the late James Anthony Noel, Professor Claiborne Carson, who came together to start this event with our great friends Valerie Miles Tribble, Dorsey Blake from Fellowship Church, and many others come together to bring about a way we can bring together both thinkers, theologians, clergy, scholars, laypersons to come together and to think about King and his thought. So this is what this program is about. We look forward to a wonderful engagement with our great friend, Dr. Dwight Hopkins. We are ready now to kick it over to him as he is ready now to speak to us. Good to see you, Dr. Hopkins.
And thank you, Aaron Brazil. It's good to be with you. Anytime I can virtually move the cold Chicago and come out to the Bay Area, I am there in spirit and hopefully one day in body. But this is a very important series, and I'm honored to be included in it. You've had some stellar stars that preceded me, I think 4 people, and it's good to know that all these Lenten series King Fear conversations will be packaged and available to schools, scholars, communities, families globally. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here, and I thank you and all the partners who have arranged this session. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. approached the reality of fear from different perspectives. He teaches us how to look at fear, embrace fear, and overcome fear within our families, in movements for justice cause, and as individual human beings. As a husband, King feared for his wife. He mentions questions like, what might happen to her when he was away organizing or preaching at another church? Newspapers had already published his home address to alert the Klan and the citizen councils about the exact location of his house. And he was aware of Black women who had been randomly kidnapped off the streets of the South. Some eventually returned violated, others never to be heard from again. And as a father, he held a similar fear for his children, especially his two daughters. However, it was not just the possibility of physical harm that he feared. He also feared the psychological damage impacting the life of his children. King tells the story of how he was driving one of his daughters past a children's play area called Fun Town, and his daughter asked if she could go in. For the first time, King had to explain the reality of segregation and that her racial classification kept her out of the children's amusement park. And King remarks how he saw dark clouds begin to surround the initial innocent joy that his daughter expressed when she first asked to go into the amusement park. Not only was this the fear of a father in the South, let's not forget that King took his civil rights movement to the North in 1966, when he moved into segregated housing projects in Chicago. To further make his point, to publicize the need for quality housing for poor and working class Blacks, King brought his children to live in the squalor and anger of the northern inner city. Shortly after moving into the so-called ghetto projects, King describes the transformation of his children into what he called angry, unruly little people. And he was forced to send them back home down south. Now he feared what some Black Northern parents feared for their children: the lack of space, the potential violence, the poor schooling, the loud noises, the failure for the cities to pick up trash and garbage, and the lack of Southern politeness. For King had changed his children into little humans he didn't even recognize right before his eyes. In addition, King feared for the soul of the United States. By soul, he seems to suggest that America's very moral and spiritual foundations were on the line. The sober challenge to the foundation of soul came from different places. One was the war in Vietnam. King believed that his eventual public denouncement of the Vietnam War on April 4th, 1967, was a moral obligation resulting from his calling from God to be a religious leader on a world stage. For him, Jesus did not separate the spiritual from the material. And so King could not separate his domestic struggle to heal the American races who were suffering, on the one hand, from the international war between North and South Vietnam that was also suffering and needed healing, on the other hand. As a minister of the gospel, King felt he could not put his faith into different little segregated boxes. Similarly, King had received the Nobel Peace Prize. This global recognition meant he was obligated by the weight of the world community to now be an ambassador for peace wherever there was conflict in the world. And at that time, the major war internationally was the Vietnam War. There only could be peace and healing domestically in the United States when there was peace and healing abroad. And so King's fear for the soul of America also came from his domestic movement to realize the beloved community in the United States. But he feared that racial divisions could tear the soul apart. Obviously, organizations like the Klan and the White Citizens Councils were morally on faulty ground. Why? Because by definition, they subscribed to a politics and a theology claiming that one sector of American citizens was superior to another sector, mainly because of phenotype and the rule of one drop of African blood. For King, this was indefensible on theological, philosophical, and Christian grounds. Now, but King also chastised some of the extreme elements among Black people when they reacted to white superiority groups. In the face of the Klan's theology and political views, some extreme Black people argued that all white citizens were bad and that Black American citizens were even superior to white American citizens. King felt called to speak to and heal the entire country. For him, it could not be torn apart by any elements that try to forever break the ties among all humanity. Now, a third problem that gnawed at the soul of America, which made King have fear, was the persistent and deteriorating plight of the poor and working class people. Even during his MA and PhD graduate school days, he had been wrestling with some of the great thinkers on class and wealth. And when he took the leadership of Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Montgomery, Alabama, he instituted programs to aid the plight of the poor. And it was no accident that he led desegregation efforts throughout the South on behalf of the poor. In fact, at his death on April 4th, 1968, King was involved in two final programs. One, the Poor People's March on Washington, D.C., and two, the movement of Black and poor working class sanitation workers in Memphis, Tennessee. Now, for the Washington, D.C. Poor People's Campaign, King went across the U.S. organizing poor people from Southern, rural, and small-town America, whites in Appalachia, Southern and Northern Blacks, Hispanics and Chicanos, Native Americans, and Asians. In his speeches leading up to the spring 1968 Poor People's Campaign, King stated that he was bringing the poor of all races to Washington, D.C., so that the federal government could understand and see the plight of the poor. And consequently, the government could give the poor financial and material support. The federal government should offer concrete policies and legislation to help lift the burden of poverty off of the backs of the poor. King went so far as to say that there would not be any false tranquility in the United States until real solutions were offered for the problems of the poor. The soul of the nation, the equilibrium of wealth in the nation, had to be readjusted. To help this come about, King often referred to the Christian Bible, where the stories of Jesus call for helping the oppressed, bringing freedom, clothing the naked, visiting the prisoner, giving water to the thirsty, and setting free those who are captives. In his book, Strength to Love, King actually offers 4 solutions for the presence of fear in our personal lives. First, he states, quote, "We must unflinchingly face our fears and honestly ask ourselves why we are afraid. This confrontation will, to some measure, grant us power," close quote. In other words, don't avoid fears, don't repress them, and don't try and imagine them away. I call this first prescription for dealing with fear deliberate discomfort. Deliberate discomfort means people deliberately place themselves in situations of discomfort. Such positioning might seem counterintuitive. However, it yields results on several levels in relationship to fear. Well, one level is to change our perspective and embrace fear. And in certain instances, go after the fear that is in us. A sort of learning to enjoy living with the fear that is in us. As we change our perspective and attitude toward fear, we can better live with it and find out what is the real basis of fear. Now, another level of deliberate discomfort is to enjoy positioning oneself in discomfortable fear, circumstances of fear. The more one does this, the more a person gets familiar with fear. The more fear has less and less of a grip on a person's life. Now, to repeat, the larger first point of King is for us to